Hello everyone and welcome to another episode. Now, did the pro-German historians subvert not only British history, as we've seen in the previous video, but also continental European history? And we're going to argue in this video, they did the lot. They subverted and altered the lot with a pro-German bias, which has altered, skewed history and created immeasurable paradoxes which puzzle us to this day. And in this video, we're going to list many of the paradoxes, many of which I have covered in previous videos. We're going to list a lot. Let's start with ancient Britain, because this is really quite strange and fascinating. Now, why are the ancient British, even post-Roman British, described as tribes with chieftains, despite possessing a huge number of cities, practicing the Roman way of life? While the Angles, Saxons and Jutes who invaded are described as nations with kings. They're never described as tribal chieftains. And despite them being invaders and nomads, it's a paradox. Why do historians say that after the Romans pulled out of Britain, much of Britain reverted to tribalism, quote unquote? It sounds a bit like the Romans were needed to prop up the Roman way of life, and without the Romans, all the people suddenly wanted to start bonking each other on the head and didn't want to take hot baths anymore. Why were historians shocked that in December 2020, it was unveiled that a post-Roman 5th century glorious mosaic had been unveiled in Britain, created by these savage and unruly tribes? No such mosaics were created by the more sophisticated, invading Anglo-Saxons. How very odd. How very odd indeed. So, what the pro-German historians did to the Britons, they did everywhere, and they did a lot to the Britons. All British chronicled monastic history is described as being mythical. That is pre-Germanic chronicled history. It's described as myth and legend. Yet, using the same monastic chronicling methods, all Saxon, Anglo chronicled monastic material made with the same methods is considered as real history. Because the Germans did everything, and the Latin, they even supersede the Latins in later times. They did everything. And it's the same in the East, exactly the same in the East. So let's turn to the East, where the same thing happened. Even worse. So I read a recent article with astonishment last year. It said that the Germans gave the Slavs their first alphabet, the runes, in the 600s AD. Amazing! Especially considering the runes are just one form of the 26, 25, 24, 23 letter alphabet, which have been used by everyone since ancient times. So turning to the East, the same thing happened to the Britons as to the Slavs and to other peoples in the East. Now, because of the pro-German viewpoint, paradoxes are created. Suddenly, we can't explain things anymore. We can't explain why the Slavs were incapable of creating their own letters. So history says the Germans had to give them letters, or the Greeks had to give them letters. They couldn't do it themselves because they didn't have a civilization. They were tribes. But is that really the case? No, it's not the case. We're going to see why. Why did German speakers conquer France? This is another paradox. From the Romans, yet abandon their own homeland to the invisible Slavs who appeared out of nowhere and are not found on any map before 500 AD. It's so odd that they would abandon their lands, their supposed lands, to an invisible enemy. Another paradox created by the pro-German viewpoint. Why do the Portuguese, based on the Germans, obviously, according to history, German-speaking Slav people from Central Europe, these were said to be Germans, according to conventional history, in ancient times. I think they're Slavs, but they say Why do the Portuguese speak with more of a Slav accent than a German accent? If that's the case, this is the Slavic kingdom which became Portugal. If the Slav Germans, who were the majority of ancient Germans, in fact spoke Germanic, maybe they didn't. Why did the Slav Germans have a different culture to the non-Slav Germans according to the Romans, if they're all Germans, all the same language? It's strange. And these paradoxes keep appearing and multiplying if we keep using a pro-German, the Germans did everything, no one else existed viewpoint. And no other explanations exist. For instance, why were the Slav Germans and Germans, the pro-German historians say these were German speakers, why were they conquered by a tribe with an identical name, the Slavs? Because Slav is pronounced as Svev in Western Europe, in the Western Slav countries. Why were they conquered by a tribe with the same name? It's remarkable. It's a remarkable coincidence, wouldn't you say? It's unbelievable. And these Slavs appearing from nowhere, appearing from the east, or who knows where they came from, they then adopted, instead of, they then adopted this German name for themselves, but they kept their own language. Very strange. It's weird. Why do historians never study the origin of alchemy symbols, which to me are an alphabet, clearly, used by the Croats in ancient times? And also very similar to the Czech Glagolithic alphabet, which was supposedly given to them by Greeks. But having analysed the Glagolithic alphabet in previous videos, I've found that it seems to be an ancestor of both the Greek Linear B alphabet and some Egyptian hieroglyphic writing. We even see the Ankh symbol for life in the Glagolithic alphabet. We even see hieroglyphic values. And no one could speak hieroglyphic at the time when this alphabet was supposedly given to the Slavs by the Greeks. Another paradox. It goes on and on. You will notice that the French language is a sharp, very rough sounding form of Latin compared to all the other Latins. Why? I think it is because France was conquered by the Germans. It became the German Reich under Charlemagne and earlier kings. The Germans, for some reason, mysteriously fleeing from their original homeland and handing it over to the Slavs, even though they were the supposedly fierce warriors. I think this is explained by that fact. Now, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese sound more fluid. Did the Germans not go there? Did the Germans not take over these areas? Well, I think, it is proven, the Vandals are mostly Slav by DNA, by Sardinian DNA. And also the Ostrogoths are mostly Slav. The Visigoths might be half Slav, half German, or mostly German. And these tribes conquered the more fluid-speaking Latin areas. Interesting. Now, what does Germany mean? It's the name of a vanished tribe that the Romans saw in the German region, and they called the entire region Germany after this lost tribe. We don't even know when they lived or who they were. And modern Germany has taken the name of this Roman Germany, as Belgium, for example, named itself after the Belgae, even though they were the Spanish Netherlands, the monarchy form of the Netherlands. And the Romans never described the language of these Germans. So modern pro-German historians fill it in and they say, oh, they must have spoken German, right? Yet, it's strange that they claim all the ancient Germans in a geographical region spoke the same language, even though they were supposedly wandering tribes. And this also means that another paradox appears, which is that there are no ancient Slavs. They don't really exist. And some say, oh, they must be the Venedi in the east or something like that. But no one knows anything about them. So they may as well have said the Japanese were speaking a Slav language. So here's another paradox. Why do the Czechs show a huge empire called Great Moravia on their ancient maps in the east, in the center of Europe, which clearly blocked Charlemagne's eastward expansion? And this empire existed for centuries, before and after Charlemagne. Why is this empire never drawn on maps of Charlemagne's empire? In fact, if you look at a map of Charlemagne's empire, it's rarely surrounded by any kingdoms at all. And one wonders why he didn't conquer the entire planet based on this. But in fact, he was surrounded by other empires and other kingdoms. But it is a dark age for a reason. Cometary bombardment, plague, who knows? So the pro-German viewpoint is not to show any strong empires near Charlemagne. It's just Charlemagne, the center of civilization, the only civilized man. He tried to learn to read, but he wasn't very good at it, or he couldn't read. But he tried to read. He tried to enlighten the Dark Ages in this savage time. That's what the history books tell us. And everyone else was a barbarian. Yeah. So why does modern history claim the Slavs moved in from the east when no ancient history book writes this? And there are many ancient and medieval history books. In fact, medieval Slav chronicles say the Slavs had always been there since the beginning of time, occupying the same territories as they were found in modern times, with no Dark Age invasion. In fact, occupying exactly the same territories as the Suebi Germans had occupied since the time of Christ on ancient maps. It's a strange and weird coincidence. So there was no Dark Age invasion, Slavs invading German territories. In fact, this has led me to believe that it is the Germans who came in from the west. They must have come in possibly from a sunken land in the west, the Japan of Europe, which sank. And this would explain why the Germans have their own unique Teutonic religion, which differs very strongly from the Indo-Aryan gods that we see from America to India, even ancient Egypt, as we've revealed on this channel. In fact, an ancient Polish chronicle I've described in a previous video describes the Slavs as a large empire, which then fragmented in the Dark Ages, turning into smaller principalities. That's why Poland started as a principality of a larger empire. And this would explain also the common tongue of the Slavs. Interesting. The pro-German viewpoint says the Germans created Russia. And this led people such as someone starting with an H in World War II to invade Russia, I believe. But if the Rus were German speaking, why isn't this indicated in Russia? And why don't the Rus kings have German names? They don't. Why is it alleged that the Germans invaded everywhere, creating nations and civilizations in the Dark Ages, when just the opposite would occur from an invasion? Because an invasion always results in chaos and destruction. Isn't this a contradiction? So on the ancient map of all of North Europe, continental Northern Europe, it's all German. According to modern historians, it's all German-speaking tribes. So why did the Teutonic Knights then, say 1,000 years later, have to start pushing east, exterminating the native Pomeranians and Prussians who didn't speak German? We barely knew what they spoke now because they're gone. If these territories were already German on ancient maps. It goes on and on and on. The paradoxes cannot end if created by an incomplete view of the past.